Hello, APUSHers. In this video, I'm going to go through all the key concepts for Period 1 from the College Board framework. I'm not a huge fan of focusing on the key concepts because it kind of takes away from the narrative of history. However, I think it's important to cover them at least once, and some College Board questions directly reference the language from the concepts. Also, the concepts were reorganized recently to go with specific learning objectives, and some of the concepts are used multiple times. Okay, here we go. Learning Objective A. Explain the context for European encounters in the Americas from 1491 to 1607. So context in this case means what was going on in the world at the time of exploration. First, as native populations migrated and settled across the vast expanse of North America, over time they developed distinct and increasingly complex societies by adapting to and transforming their diverse environments. Some key aspects of this is that geography and climate played a huge role in shaping Native American society. Some are more sedentary in agrarian farming societies, and some are more hunter-gatherer. We will take a look at specific examples of these later. In general, maize, or corn cultivation, is very important across North America. Even Native Americans that live in dry climates like the Southwest were able to cultivate it. In a few cases, specifically central Mexico, food surpluses allowed for complex societies with hierarchical governments like the Aztecs and Cahoqui, who were the mound builders in the Mississippi River area. Continuing now with context, different native societies adapted to and transformed their environments through innovations in agriculture, resource use, and social structure. Also, contact among Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in the Columbian Exchange and significant social, cultural, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic. Some examples of this include going from the Old World to the New World. Diseases devastated Native American populations. Horses transformed plains tribes, and there was a cultural mixing in many places. And going from the New World to the Old World. Corn and potatoes allow for greater surpluses of food around Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Columbian Exchange also led to the development of the Spanish Empire in the Western Hemisphere, resulting in extensive demographic, economic, and social changes. Some examples of this include cash crops like sugar and tobacco, the encomienda system, which was a labor system in which Native Americans had to give a significant amount of their produce and labor to a large Spanish landowner, and the transatlantic slave trade. Continuing on with context, European expansion into the Western Hemisphere generated intense social, religious, political, and economic competition and changes within European societies. Some examples of this include the development of nation-states, which were replacing the old feudal structure of most of Europe. There were also intense wars within and between countries between Roman Catholics and Protestants. This all stems from Martin Luther and the growth of different Protestant sects across Europe. There was also the development of mercantilism in the economic sector, in which nations had the goal of increasing exports and decreasing imports. This would accumulate more gold and silver, so then the leaders could use that to expand their country's political influence and military power. Okay, last one for Learning Objective A. I promise the rest won't be as long. In their interactions, Europeans and Native Americans asserted divergent worldviews regarding issues such as religion, gender roles, family, land use, and power. Now, I hate making huge generalizations about Native Americans because there were around 60 million before Columbus, spread across hundreds, maybe thousands of tribes with different beliefs and structures. But in general, and many times College Board will use primary sources from Columbus's journals or Bartolomé de las Casas' writings. In their view, Native Americans had a very childlike nature. Gender roles were less strict amongst Native Americans. Land use tended to be more communal, and Europeans have a very strong paternalistic society, which was less so with Native societies. Now on to Learning Objective B, which is explain how and why various Native populations in the period before European contact interacted with the natural environment in North America. So the spread of maize cultivation ran from present-day Mexico northward into the present-day American Southwest and beyond. It supported economic development, settlement, advanced irrigation, and social diversification among societies. Now we're going to get into the specific examples of native populations and their interactions, starting with the Great Basin region and Great Plains, which are arid regions, and the natives there had largely mobile lifestyles with hunting and gathering. Next, in the Northeast and Mississippi River Valley, and along the Atlantic seaboard, some societies developed mixed agricultural and hunter-gatherer economies that favor the development of permanent villages. And finally, societies in the Northwest and present-day California supported themselves by hunting and gathering, and in some areas developed settled communities supported by their vast resources of the ocean. All right, Learning Objective C, which is a short one. Explain the causes of exploration and conquest of the New World by various European nations. There's an easy way to remember this one, which is the 3 Gs. God, gold, and glory. But for a more in-depth look, we have European nations' efforts to explore and conquer the New World stemmed from a search for new sources of wealth, economic and military competition, and a desire to spread Christianity. Some specific examples for this concept are Europeans wanting to find a trade route to Asia and tap into the lucrative silk and spice trade, plus establish trade links and partners with that part of the world. Aside from that, there is always the search for gold and silver, and this will be very prevalent in the Americas. Going back to the goals of mercantilism, increasing trade and wealth of a nation plays a huge part in the competition amongst European nation states like France, Spain, and England. Having a colonial empire both adds to the prestige of a nation and also the wealth of resources. And finally, the Roman Catholic Church was very concerned with converting as many as possible to Christianity. There will be major drives led by priests and Christian orders like the Franciscans and Jesuits to convert the millions of Native Americans. Okay, learning objective D. We'll have 2 slides and covers the very important topic of the Columbian Exchange. Make sure you know what it is and the effects of it. So the Columbian Exchange brought new crops to Europe from the Americas, stimulating European population growth and new sources of mineral wealth, which facilitated the European shift from feudalism to capitalism. Improvements in maritime technology and more organized methods for conducting international trade, such as joint stock companies, helped drive changes to economies in Europe and the Americas. Some examples of this concept include the caravel sail that allowed for more cross-ocean trade as it helped ships sail against prevailing winds. When it comes to joint stock companies, there were many attempted by English, Dutch, and French groups of investors. The most notable for APUSH, which is more of a Period 2 topic, is the Virginia Company. However, that would revert to a royal colony after mismanagement. Finally, a major economic change is the decrease in the feudal economy that had dominated Europe for centuries. It was a very localized economy, and there was an increase in international trade. An example of this is the Triangle Trade, from which profits from Europe paid for more slaves from Africa, which were sent to the Americas to cultivate cash crops and other resources, and those profits went to Europe, and the cycle continued. The last concept for learning objective D is Spanish exploration and conquest of the Americas were accompanied and furthered by widespread deadly epidemics and devastated native populations, and by the introduction of crops and animals not found in the Americas. The notable example for disease is smallpox, and the notable animals brought to the Americas were horses, chickens, pigs, and cows. Learning objective E is just 1 slide. Explain how the growth of the Spanish Empire in North America shaped the development of social and economic structures over time. The key concepts related to the learning objective include: in the encomienda system, Spanish colonial economies marshaled Native American labor to support plantation-based agriculture and extract precious metals and other resources. European traders partnered with some West African groups who practiced slavery to forcibly extract slave labor for the Americas. The Spanish imported enslaved Africans to labor in plantation agriculture and mining, and the Spanish developed a caste system that incorporated and carefully defined the status of the diverse population of Europeans, Africans, and Native Americans in their empire. There are 2 slides for learning objective F, which is explain how and why European and Native American perspectives of others developed and changed in the period. This is how Europeans and natives perceived each other in this time period. We covered some of this earlier with a discussion of Columbus and Las Casas' writings, so I'm only going to briefly touch upon the concepts. In their interactions, Europeans and Native Americans asserted divergent worldviews regarding issues such as religion, gender roles, family, land use, and power. Mutual misunderstandings between Europeans and Native Americans often defined the early years of interaction and trade as each group sought to make sense of the other. Over time, Europeans and Native Americans adopted some useful aspects of each other's culture. Some examples include Native Americans adopted European technology, everything from silverware to weapons, and Europeans adopted Native American crops like corn and potatoes. And the last 2 key concepts for Objective F. As European encroachments on Native American lands and demands on their labor increased, Native people sought to defend and maintain their political sovereignty, economic prosperity, religious beliefs, and concepts of gender relations through diplomatic negotiations and military resistance. Extended contact with Native Americans and Africans fostered a debate among European religious and political leaders about how non-Europeans should be treated, as well as evolving religious, cultural, and racial justifications for the subjugation of Africans and Native Americans. With this concept, we have a really important primary source in Bartolomé de las Casas, History of the Indies. In his writings, he blames the devastation of Native American populations on mistreatment by Spanish conquistadors, so he pleads with the monarch of Spain to pass laws to protect Native Americans. Okay, the last learning objective is explain the effects of the development of the transatlantic voyages from 1491 to 1607. The concepts on this one are all repeated from previous learning objectives, so I'm only going to discuss the highlighted content for this objective. There are incredible effects of the voyages and colonization of the Americas upon Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The native population is devastated by disease, and the society and culture is upended by Spanish domination. East Africans are exploited in the slave trade and transported to the New World to work on large plantations producing cash crops like sugar and tobacco. And we have the rise of nation states and colonial empires, especially Spain in this era. They are exploiting the resources and labor of the Americas to gain wealth, power, and prestige. All of this is centered around the Columbian Exchange, which is the overall process of the transportation of flora, fauna, diseases, peoples, cultures, and ideas across the Atlantic in both directions. Okay, that does it for Period 1 Key Concept Review. That was a long one, but these are really important concepts at the core of Period 1 for APUSH. Subscribe to the channel for APUSH review and primary source explanations.